I knew about God, but I didn't know Him. Anthony Acampora from Banyan Treatment Centers joins us to talk about filling that God sized hole. He discusses faith based treatment, turning from addiction, and finding a calling through service. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery Podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery. Ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
The Illuminate Recovery Podcast is brought to you by Illuminate Billing Advocates. Make billing and collection simple with leader in substance abuse and mental health billing services. Verification and analysis of benefits, pre-authorizations, utilization management, accurate claim submission and management, denial and appeal management, and industry-leading reporting. Improve your practice's cash flow and your ability to help your clients with Illuminate Billing Advocates.
Today, Kurt and I have the opportunity to talk with Anthony Acampora. Anthony is the National Director of Faith-Based Services at Banyan Treatment Centers. He's a segment talk show host at Operation Confidence. He's an author, speaker, writer, and global goodwill ambassador. Anthony has extensive recovery. He has an extensive recovery story. He said it felt like all the doors were closed to him during his active addiction days. And now the doors have opened up, and he's loving life and feels blessed every day. Anthony, thanks so much for coming on with Kurt and I today and being willing to share.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm kind of excited to talk with you and learn a little bit more about what you do. I heard somebody mention this a couple times to me, and I thought it was interesting. And I don't know what your take is on this, but they said that those that, and when you talk about faith-based, I'm going to go a different direction a little bit. But those that believe in, or Christians, those that are Christians or believe in Christ, those numbers are dwindling rapidly. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I mean, it's, I think for the first time recently, it's been under 50% that people even say that they belong to a church. I think COVID had a lot to do with that because a lot of people were just online and they never went back. But it's definitely from when I was growing up, which is a long time ago, in the 80s, which is a great period of time. Now that I look back at it, I love it. But big difference. But the interesting thing is we get a lot of younger clients that come into our faith program, and they're not really coming here for that. I had a kid today come in from the other program, and he walked in, he went to the devotional group, he goes, I love this, this is what I need. So they're out there, but it's just, it's definitely, the numbers are, you're right, are going down. Church attendance, Pew research studies, all those things indicate a downward trend.
What do you make of that? What's the impact long term from your perspective? Because I think that's kind of your field, and what do you see the shift? Because I hear a lot of people who are really strong in their spirituality. So talk about what you hear there and see there a little bit.
I think that, things got really distorted along the way the past 2,000 years. And I think it's kind of all coming to a head in the last maybe 10, 15 years. I deal with a lot of people that come in with a distorted view of God, a distorted view of the Bible and Christianity. And it's really not even their fault. It was forced on them, and in a really judgmental, legalistic type of way. And I grew up in that system too. I had to go to church. I had to do certain things. And, I think back then I would have probably rebelled like people do now, but you really couldn't do that back then when I was growing up. It was a little bit different. And I think people have more of a voice now. and they have, they're speaking their mind, and it was never really set up like that. I mean, it's not the teachings of Christ. He surrounded himself with the broken in spirit, with the hurting, with the outcasts. So, why would we do anything different now? So I really, we try to approach it here to meet people where they're at, right where they're at on their spiritual journey. And they may not even have a spiritual journey.
Mm.
Most of them don't. So we have clients in our program that never went to church before. So we're kind of trying to approach it more as the teachings of Christ rather than the Bible thumping, legalistic, judgmental condemnation, which were the people that Jesus would go off on back in the day, which were the Pharisees and the ones that were very legalistic. So,
I like it. I love it. It's interesting to watch, history and watch time and watch, and it is true, right? There's a lot of people that grew up in that you have to do this and these are the rules and it forced upon, and that leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
yeah, it's I mean, legal. It's like having a legal pad, which I have right here, and just having a list, and it's almost like a checklist. And I again, I went through it too. My brother still has that checklist, and it's not really a lot of times coming from the heart. Oftentimes people feel worse when they walk out of a church, depending on the denomination or the message. And it's supposed to be a hospital for the sinners church, not a museum for good people. And then somebody comes in that they don't know and they stare at them and
Hmm.
point down and judge them. So like I said, it got very distorted along the way. But people don't respond to that, and their identity. A lot of the clients that we deal with are dealing with substance abuse and mental health disorders, and they're already pretty beaten down by life and society and their own thoughts. They're pretty tormented by their own thoughts. So the last thing they need is to be more shame and more guilt laid on them. So we try to build them up and try to get them out of shame and try to let them realize, how God sees them with an unconditional love, and He still has a plan for them, and He still wants to use them, and there's hope, and they respond to that most of the time.
Hmm. Well, I think that's the powerful message there. Anthony, talk a little bit about how you ended up in this industry and what your journey was, and has a faith-based approach been part of that, or how did that come to play?
Well, I grew up, having to go to church and that whole thing. I knew about God. I never really knew Him. I didn't do much to know Him. I just kind of used Him when I needed something, like so many people do. I was a CEO Christian for most of my life, Christmas, Easter only, and and I didn't really want to go then. I just felt guilty, so somebody would drag me there on like Christmas Eve or something. It wasn't coming from the heart. And then, I was in the corporate world for a long time. I worked in Manhattan for almost 7 years in the security investigations field. I ended up moving to California. I was a director of corporate security. So, from a worldly perspective, I was doing really well. From a spiritual or any type of peace, inner peace perspective, I was doing really bad. And everything kind of hit a wall in late 2004, 2005, and I left that world, that whole career, and I ended up finding out things that happened behind the scenes that I didn't really know for sure. And when I found that out, I had tremendous resentments in my heart and a lot of anger and unforgiveness. And that just kind of took off. That was like a wildfire. It just got worse and worse. And then that led into a lot of emotional pain, like depression and anxiety. And I didn't sleep for about a month and a half in January 2006. I don't think I slept the whole month of February, maybe an hour or so. But it was a lot of pain. It was a lot of anger. It was a lot of resentment. You look for escapes from that. And I looked in the wrong places, which was a lot of alcohol and then gambling. So I ended up in this field because I ended up being, I was the director of investigations for this agency in Broward County, and we ended up implementing ministries, and I became a chaplain, and I headed up a mental health and addiction ministry. So that's kind of how I went from the investigative world to this industry, recovery and mental health disorders. And then I ended up with Banyan 6 years ago. Next week it'll be 6 years. So it's a
Congrats.
long journey. I took a long, long route.
So did I hear you say that the securities piece was that connected to a faith-based approach, or was those two separate, very separate things?
Well, yeah, the security. I was in that field for about 18 years. It was more investigations. It was embezzlement, fraud, theft, like stuff like that type of security and investigations. And then I actually became a licensed private investigator. So I was in that whole world, but it kind of went into this agency that I was at in Broward County that started to implement more ministry type things. And that's how I ended up shifting from the investigative security world that's what I was always in and thought I always would be in. But God had other plans. And, it came through a lot of pain, 7 years really of a lot of pain and bad choices and hurt and all the stuff that goes with it. But God turns, the mess into a message if we allow Him to, and if we seek Him with all of our heart. So I got to the point where I truly was seeking Him with all my heart because I was so broken in spirit and just beat down by everything. So it wasn't just foxhole prayers and seeking God when I needed something. It was, I got to get with you. He gave me the ability to forgive, which was unbelievable because I couldn't do that for 7 years. And once that happened, then things started to change and I started to align with Him. And because I was out of alignment for a long time, it was like a car being out of alignment, which I've had, and they always pull like you could let your hands off the steering wheel and they almost go right into the curb. I was out of spiritual alignment for most of my life, really, but definitely that 7 years was really bad. I wanted nothing to do with God. I blamed Him for everything, and it was a mess. But again, He turns it into a message if you allow Him to, and he will work things together for good.
And I do think it's those pivotal moments that you talk about where, you're doing investigations and security and, all of those pieces, and all of a sudden this opportunity opens up that takes you in a very different direction and gives you some of the starting pieces that you needed.
Yeah, it was a welcome change because I never would have been fulfilled or even really happy if I went back into that industry because I always would have been comparing because I ended up being a director of corporate security at I was one of the youngest ones. I think I was like 32 at the time. So very worldly into the drinking and everything, the travel and the power. So I would have always compared to that, and I don't think I would have been able to live up to that going back into that. But I never really was filling that what they call a God-shaped hole. I was always empty, even though I was doing well, financially and all that stuff in the world. I still had a void, and which can only be filled, by Him. It's a God-shaped hole, and once I started filling that and He started to transform my heart, I started to develop a compassion for people who were suffering, especially with similar things that I went through. And I never had that compassion before. I had like the opposite of that because in my role, I was either having people fired or arrested or both. And so you become like desensitized to any type of emotion or human suffering. You just have to do that job. So I had to kind of unlearn all that, and God had to really work on my heart, the pride, the selfishness, the whole thing, everything. It's just it was pretty bad, and the glory has to go to Him because there's no way I could have done it by myself. I demonstrated that for a long period of time, and people can't believe that I'm a chaplain or in ministry, or people still cannot believe this because I'm like the exact opposite of anyone that would ever do anything like that. And that's what God does. He's in the restoration business.
Hmm.
Amazing.
Talk about, so when you did recovery, did you actually go to a program to get some help that way? What did that look like to
Yeah.
try and, overcome that addiction?
Yeah, I mean, I never had an issue really with any of this stuff until 2006 is when it really got really bad, and I was in different treatments across the country. I was in a place in New Mexico, I was in Texas, I was in Connecticut, I was in Florida, I was all over the place. But I didn't really do much in there. I didn't really open up. I wasn't transparent. I was still hiding and running from all the pain. So what we try to tell our clients, and I was just telling somebody this morning, you have to kind of go towards the pain and through it to overcome it. And it's counterintuitive, especially coming out of addiction, because you're usually doing the opposite. You're numbing the pain and medicating it by drinking or whatever, drugs or whatever, or gambling. So it takes a while to kind of get in the habit of that, of actually not having something to numb or medicate it, and then go towards all this pain and start digging stuff up. And but that's what I think. I've seen it over and over. I mean, I think that's part of the process of overcoming and healing any of this stuff.
So you went through programs. How many programs did it take before you were able to maintain your sobriety?
Whoa, a lot. It was. I mean, I lost count. Really, it was over 10. I think it was like 13, honestly. Again, I didn't do much in there. It wasn't really the place's fault or the therapist's fault. It was mine. The change really came out of faith-based program, which is in Naples, Florida. I ended up kicked out of my sister's house. My contact list dwindled down after 7 years of this to about 3 people, and she was one of them. And nobody wanted anything to do with me. I was just, it was bad. And so I ended up in this like shelter in Naples, Florida. And it was, the blessing was it was connected to a faith-based program, and that's when things really changed, because I restored my relationship with God, and that never happened in any of the other ones. So that's when things really started to take a positive turn. And that was 2012 into 2011. So it took a while, and it does take a while sometimes, but you just can't give up. You just keep going forward, and God's going to prevail if you keep Him, at the center of things.
And so
Were you at
you,
rock bottom there, or was there just a different message?
Uh, it was pretty low. I wasn't even in a bed in the shelter. I was sleeping on the floor, this huge like kitchen. Um, it got pretty bad when you start losing people, and people aren't in your life anymore, and you're hurting people, and you just have this shame and guilt, and you're not aligned with God. I mean, it kind of just wears you down. It's like being in a fight, like these boxers, they're just hitting each other, they just get worn out. So that was one of probably the rock bottoms. I think there was a few of them actually, but that was pretty bad at that point.
I know people talk about their rock bottoms, and I think it's very different for everybody. But it's interesting to just explore what that looked like for you, and those things that, like those events. It's not just one event that turns the corner. It's a series of events that get you in the right place and the openness to be able to make that shift and that change. And it, like you said, it takes time. It can take a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, God's gonna to work on your heart, and I had a lot of areas to work on, and you start to, get a handle on one aspect, and then something else is happening, and I mean, it's an ongoing process. We're all in it. We're all a work in progress. But he is faithful. I mean, I had so many different things happen that he showed up, and I could attribute to him. And I'm just grateful to be alive, and then in addition to that, be able to be used by him with people that are really hurting and really broken, and that's a blessing. There's no price tag on that. I mean, whether I went back into a different field and stuff like that, I wouldn't even consider it. I mean, there's really no comparison, because the money and the power and the titles don't mean anything like they used to,
Yeah.
right? It's amazing how he genuinely could transform someone's heart.
So you took that approach of, that faith base that really started to fill that hole in you and really started to allow you to heal. But then you really took off with that. How did you, when did you get to the point where you went, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and I'm going to also help other people in the same way that I was helped?
Yeah, it's a good question because I used to volunteer in the psychiatric unit. It's still here. It's right down the street. It's at a hospital, and I used to do Bible studies in there like twice a week. I did that for almost a year, and I really liked it. I really realized like this is something that I would really like to do. I like trying to impact, people and like molding people and leading people to him. So I think it had to do with around that time where I started to actually volunteer. I was told to do it for years, but it's hard to give something that you don't have. And I didn't even care about myself at all. So why would I want to care or help someone else? So I think once that started, then doors just started opening. You try to force these doors open all the time, and it's like God has something else, and you really kind of feel it that He's not the author of confusion but of peace, and you start to follow that peace, and you start to really allow Him to direct your path. And I just did that. I kind of I compare it to like football. Like when I play football, like they have these pulling guards on the line, and they just look for people to just knock out of the way, and they snap the ball, and the pulling guard goes upfield, and sometimes the running backs don't want to wait for that guard to pull upfield, and they try to do it on their own, and something happens, and they get hurt or they fumble the ball or whatever. And so I kind of waited on God, and I really didn't make a move without consulting Him and trusting Him and allowing Him to direct my path, even if I didn't understand it. So
Mm.
and then it's just been the last 8.5 years have been absolutely incredible. The exact opposite of the previous 7, which everything would go wrong. It was just a nightmare situation. Some was my own fault. Some was it was just horrible. And really, I mean, life's not going to be perfect, but like the big things, the major things, it's been absolutely incredible.
Good. Exciting.
It's cool. It's cool what you've done, and it's not minor. I mean, I think it's important to kind of talk about all the different places where you've had influence. I mean, you've been on a host of radio shows. You've published quite a bit of Christian literature, and also a lot of articles as well. You've got a ton of education. I mean, this isn't just a hobby for you. Like it's very evident that you're very dedicated to this path, and that you've put a lot of time into it, and you continue to do that. I'm curious. There are, in your position, there are people that often get very offended if you bring up religion or if you bring up God. Especially I would imagine when they're irritable and starting to detox and in that space. How do you approach or love on those kind of people that are not really open?
Yeah, I think, like I was saying, you kind of have to meet them where they're at. And I've been in that space too, where I wanted absolutely nothing to do with God. In fact, my sister would come over, and I knew what she was going to say, and I would literally hide from her. Or if she called, I would put the phone away from my ear. I just didn't want to hear. It would just enrage me. Like I said, I was far away from God. He never left me. I left Him, and I had a lot of resentment. I was blaming Him for a lot of this stuff. I believed in Him, but I just was really upset about the whole thing. My life was just in turmoil, and nothing would fall back into place and everything. So I try not to like people, because I'll do groups and speak at some of our locations. Like tomorrow, I go to one that's about an hour and a half from here, and they're not necessarily there for preaching or anything to do with God. So I a lot of times I focus on my own experiences and in recovery, like the stuff that I was mentioning, and kind of I kind of put God in that, but not in a like offensive way. It's kind of like just layered in, and then it kind of goes from there. You can't people usually aren't going to respond. They already have the resentments and things and whatever the past and got hurt by the church or whatever. In some cases, so you kind of have to ease into it. You have to kind of like sprinkle it out. We're like planting seeds, basically, like a gardener.
Mhm.
So I kind of do it like that. And if it goes that way, I'd like it to. But if I could, help them in, with whatever, with resentment or unforgiveness or whatever, addiction and stuff, depression, then we kind of talk about that too. And then later on, usually it comes around. They ask me about it more, so, about God, about the Bible. I mean, all the time people are coming in here asking for Bibles and things. So I think you have to kind of take it slow and meet people where they're at, and definitely not be judgmental because that's what they think you're going to be, unfortunately. And don't come on too strong. And that's kind of how I try to do it. It's just a weird thing. Like people tell me, oh, I have a black charger and I have a pit bull. And people, like, I go to meet somebody and they're looking for like some little old guy with like a cane, and they see this big Italian guy with a pit bull pulling up in like a char. So I'm not like the normal, I guess, the stereotypical, like, I guess, minister or chaplain. So maybe that helps too.
Mm.
I don't know.
I imagine, right, is it kind of makes you more human and more touchable, and like religion, can be. I'm curious if you can share some examples of how you've seen someone who grabs hold of spirituality that's in recovery, and how you've seen that help them shift, and maybe some examples of what that's looked like for them.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we had a one guy in here about a year ago that was an outspoken atheist, and he used to go into universities. He was on these different debate things, and he used to debate people about it. And he had an atheist tattoo, which, I mean, I never even saw one before, but it had to do with like atheism. It was some type of tattoo on his shoulder, and he ended up in our program, and he didn't really want to be. Somehow he ended up here, and he kept coming in. Every time he would try to leave, something would happen. Like God would get his attention, and he was talking about this. We would call them God incidents, like some type of like confirmation or something would happen, and he got really really into it, and he came to Christ, and he got baptized, and he was so into it. He said he was going to leave the atheist tattoo, but get a cross next to it, right? Because he wanted to show people where he was and where he's at now. And I didn't know if he was really going to do it, but I actually ran into him like later. He did it. He has the cross on there, and just on fire. And I think really the main thing is the genuine transformations of the heart that happens. It's not just behavior changes and behavior modification. It's like these people usually stick with this, and they're excited about it, and they want to tell other people about it. So all types of backgrounds, everything you could possibly think of, have come through here in the past 6 years, and I've seen God do amazing things.
Mm. It's incredible to, I mean, it would be great if you could share all these personal experiences, but it's their story to tell. And but it's interesting to just see what speaks to people, and how something that they are so opposed to really ends up helping them shift and turn that corner. So it's just fantastic. And I know that kind of pre-show we were talking a little bit about stigma and how stigma gets in the way, and that probably applies a little bit there. Is there's a lot of stigma, preconceived ideas about their experiences in the past in lots of areas, not just religion, but with life, and maybe father figures and male figures, and all of that plays into it. Talk a little bit about stigma and how you work around that.
Yeah, it's a big issue, and I spoke about it at this event about a month ago, and I actually spoke about it at we do alumni meetings too, because our faith program is nationally now, so it goes out to all the Banyans, all levels of care. So there's 14 Banyans nationally, and we had an alumni meeting a couple weeks ago, and the title was Shattering the Stigma. And I referenced a study from 2016 that talked about 25% of people that knew they needed help. It wasn't that they were saying, oh, I'm okay, I got this, I don't have a problem. They knew they needed treatment. They were at that point, and they didn't seek it because of the stigma, because of the judgment, because of how people would have, looked at them or whatever, or looked down on them. So it's a significant thing. I think it comes out of not understanding. I don't really think people oftentimes are trying to hurt people and things like that. I think sometimes they're trying to help them, especially their family and loved ones. They just don't know how. They don't understand the nature of this. So it doesn't really make sense to them. Why wouldn't you just stop? Why would you keep going to these places? Why can't you just stop hanging out with these people? Like, so from a natural perspective or a non addictive personality perspective, it makes absolutely no sense. And so they usually blame the person because that's the only logical thing to do because they're the ones doing it to themselves. So I think that the stigma is devastating with mental health and addiction. It's very difficult to overcome this because you're dealing with the original pain, the underneath the surface pain, whatever that may be. Mine was resentment, betrayal, but people have all kinds of different things. And then all of a sudden you're dealing with this whole other battle that's stigma and judgment and being looked down on and people don't want anything to do with you and people dropping out of your life. So it's really like dealing with two major issues, major pain at once, where you don't have that necessarily with any other illness or injury. You don't get that usually. If somebody had a heart attack, nobody's going down to the emergency room screaming at them because they've been like eating McDonald's every day for 25 years, or whatever, or they have cancer, they're smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day for 20 years. Nobody really brings that up. Yet if it's the brain and it has anything to do with the most complex organ that we have, you're the problem. You're the issue. And it's not really fair at all. But and I felt it. I've dealt with it, and that's why I talk about it. It's sometimes it hurts more than the original pain.
Mm.
So it's hard because there's not a lot of people you could go to and talk to, and you end up shutting down. You start to withdraw from society, and that's no good either. So you're going from like pain of everything that's going on and what people are saying and the stigma and the judgment to isolation pain, which is also really painful, and we're not designed to be isolated all the time. So it's rough.
It isn't, and I think that's one of the things that recovery or a recovery program can bring is that, the presence of a safe place where you can hold a space where people are supportive because they're all in the same place, right? They're all dealing with the same things, and it really helps to get people more stable and more feels more supported by going into recovery and having that space that's safe, but getting past that barrier of the stigma that they feel or experience, and how, like you said, very few of us understand addiction until we have a loved one or ourselves go through it, and then it becomes an eye opener, right? It's like an aha moment. Oh, they don't even think like I think. It's not even the same. And so being able to have these recovery programs that are vested in people and helping them recover and providing that supportive environment, I think, is imperative, and it saves life all the time. Maybe talk a little bit about Banyan and what Banyan is doing and how they've incorporated this faith-based program and I mean it's Banyan's huge. They've been around a long time. Talk about them and what they're doing and maybe how people can connect with you or connect with them.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, like what you're saying, because we were talking about that this morning in our devotional group, and I never even really looked at it like this. But I always talk about how they're connected from all the past pain and the rejection and the stigma. But this one girl was talking about like right now what they're going through, what they're experiencing, even the physical things. So they have this bond that happens, and they get really close with each other really fast. Everything's kind of accelerated because they're dealing with deep, painful things. It's not just surface conversations. But Banyon's been a blessing. It's been amazing. I came here and it was just this location in 2015, October, and they ended up giving us. They made this faith program. The owner's a devout Christian of Banyan, and it was a whole God thing because they were walking around in an empty suite, which I'm in right now, wanting to make this a faith-based program. And I happened to send a message on LinkedIn to who is now the COO. He was the executive director at the time. I didn't know who he was. I was just sending these messages out. and they were blown away at the timing. And I came in the next day, and then they hired me. So we started a program. It's called Banyan Christian Program originally, and now we rebranded it about 3 years ago to Faith and Recovery. So it's a non-denominational, faith-based program, Bible-based, but it's integrated with clinical groups as well. And there's two therapists up here. So it's an integration of clinical and faith programming, which is good because each group and each facilitator for each group is different. So you kind of keep them engaged and stimulated because they get, check out, kind of get bored sometimes if it's the same just 12-step thing over and over. So we've had this for 6 years. We've had over 2,000 clients in this program. Some of them have gone on. We just had one guy that's going to be going on staff with one of the churches here that was here a few months ago. They've gone on to missionary work, different things, but most of them just went back to, life, but they have a relationship with God that they never had, and they want to share that. So it's an amazing thing, and I'm just really, really blessed to be a part of it.
It is. I think it is amazing, and I love what you talk about is the fact that everybody can take it where they want, right? Some, like you, it now is your life. It becomes how you share that and how you help other people change their life. But it could just be something personal that they, it fills that space and that hole and allows them to move forward and show up the way they want to show up. And so, everybody gets to pick and choose how they want to do it, but to have that exposure, because I think we've talked about the fact that there's a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of hurts and wounds out there, and religion and faith is is a good place to push blame and hurt and resentment. So I love that you're providing that and that you're seeing huge benefits from that. If someone wants to get a hold of you, Anthony, and learn more about what you're doing, about your program, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, that's great. It's our website, the Faith and Recovery Program, is faithandrecovery.com. So it's www.faithandrecovery.com. We also have a national Banyan site, and I usually put my number out because a lot of times if they're trying to get in here, it's a lot of red tape and stuff. So my number is 201-538-2754, 201-538-2754. And sometimes it's just they need encouragement. I mean, maybe they're not coming into the program or whatever. I always put that out there, because I do get like texts or calls sometimes, and people are really hurting, especially in the last year and a half with everything going on. But that's probably the best way. And we expanded our program nationally, like I was saying. So we do groups via telehealth, and it's not just the physical location at Banyan. If somebody was going to a Chicago Banyan or Texas Banyan, they would still have access to telehealth, faith and recovery, individual faith counseling, and other things. So the actual program's in Pompano Beach, Florida. It's just north of Fort Lauderdale. But we had, and I didn't really realize the significance of this. I think I might even talk to you about this, but when you change your status on LinkedIn, and your title changes, it just goes out to like everybody, and it says congratulate this person on whatever. And I had so many messages from people all over, like even outside of the country. This is amazing. Everybody's taking God out of everything. Everybody's clamping down on every religious thing, and you guys are expanding nationally. And I didn't really realize the significance of it with the world we're in now and everything until I started getting those messages. And it is pretty amazing. And it's God at work, and it's the leadership of Banyan that would actually do this initially in this program and now nationally. So it's an amazing thing. I'm blessed.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I kudos to what you're doing, because it's powerful. Because as human beings, we have a lot of aspects. We have that intellectual, we've got our emotional, we've got our physical, and we've got that spiritual piece to us. And denying that piece does leave a hole. And so, whatever that looks like for somebody, I think it's a mistake to not address it, because it just doesn't leave us whole, right?
It's a great point because I used to host this other show. It was out of Miami and here in Orlando and Atlanta, and it was about faith and everything like that. And I had this guy, Dr. David Rosmarin, on, who is a Harvard professor, and he headed up the mental health and spirituality programming at McLean Hospital, which is usually one of the top three adult psychiatric hospitals in the country. It was actually number one at one point. So it's an amazing hospital. But I asked him on the show about this, and he said they did a study, him and his colleagues, about spirituality, about faith, having that component, like you said, that piece. And he thought it would probably be about 10% that wanted it, and his colleagues thought it would be even less than that would want anything to do with faith in their programming. And it ended up being 58.2% of the people that actually requested this type of programming that were going into these treatments. So, whatever the status is now, like we talked about early on, and people not going to church and getting away from that, when it comes down to it, when the rubber hits the road and they're really hurting and lost, like I was, I mean, that's where they end up going back to, is going back to God. And he's going to get your attention one way or the other. It's just a matter of, okay, I got to get with you. I got to get back with you. Your will be done. When we start to actually go towards him and truly seek him with all of our heart. And it's usually out of a lot of pain. Otherwise, I'd be still a director of corporate security making a lot of money and being a selfish jerk. I mean, I'm still a jerk sometimes, but I pray about it. But yeah, so it was a result of all the pain. The purpose came out of all the pain.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I love what you talk about. I love the concepts and the idea that, and I go back, I'm going back to, back in the old European times when they used the church and to control people. And like you said, there's the laws and the rules. And so this has been a long, long time of coming, and then people now being able to take their idea of faith and spirituality and shift it, right? So that it's not any of those controlling pieces, and they don't have the resentment, and we're not being forced, but it's, what do you want it to be? And I think that's really, I see that trend happening, and I think it's super valuable and incredibly important. So can't tell you how much, Anthony, I appreciate the work that you do and the lives that you touch, because I just think there's a lot of lost people out there, and the fact that you're willing to give your phone number and people can reach out, whether they need a program or not, they need someone to talk to. You're a safe place, and someone that's prepared to talk to them and open. So thank you for doing that, and thanks for being on.
thank you for what you guys are doing. I mean, it's awesome. It's an awesome platform, and it's just Jesus said in Matthew 25:40, "What you do to the least of mine, you're doing to me." So that's kind of the way I try to approach it. If we're hurting people, it's hurting him. If we're helping people, it's helping him. And again, it's a pretty miraculous transformation because this is God working through me and transforming hearts. And it's not just mine. I see it almost every day with the people that come in here. So it's a great testimony to him.
Hmm. I agree, and someone's got to talk about it, because if nobody talks about it, then people are, they're going to continue down the same path and have the same holes, right? Same holes in their heart.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I mean, so people sometimes don't realize what they could say or what they should say, or they don't want to offend anyone, so they don't say anything. And and a lot of people, the ones that suffer really are the ones that are hurting,
Yeah.
the ones that need that type of encouragement and need that void to be filled. So I think if you just kind of approach it from a non-judgmental perspective, and you meet people where they're at and you listen to them. I mean, that's one of the things that people say the most. Just listen. They just want somebody to listen to them rather than just put up their hand and tell them to go away. That's a big part of it too. That this is a place of healing. At Banyan in this faith program, and you feel God's presence in here. Almost every person that ever comes in here says that. It happened again today. So he inhabits the praises of his people. So in this suite, for the most part, we have a chapel in here too. We're praising him, listening to worship music. We're praying. We're trying to connect with him. You're going to feel that presence. I've been in places where I felt the exact opposite presence, and there wasn't really anything good going on there. It was a very dark presence. So it's open. It's the same spirit. It's the same God. It's open to anyone. There's nothing really special with me. I just finally got to the point where I surrendered my will to His will, and anyone could do that. He gave us free will. It's our choice if we're really gonna. 85 verses in the Bible say, "Seek me, God, with all of your heart." So we got to let go of that, whatever that percentage is that we're still holding on to. It shows up.
Yeah. Well, we're all going to keep putting the word out. I love that you're willing to come on and share that message and with our listeners. And there's a lot of people in recovery that've been on the podcast so far, and we expect to have quite a few more on. And so, thank you. And we'll have to catch up down the road and see where things are going.
Thank you so much. I wish you guys all the best. I appreciate you doing this and having me on. Thank you.
Yep.